Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown podcast. With me, as always, my esteemed colleagues, grizzled F1 scribes and co-host, Shez and Baxley. How are we keeping, fellas?
Yeah, good.
All right. Why is everyone so timid today? What's going on? Got so much to discuss. We can't have shyness. Go on then. Let's get, since you guys don't want to talk about your personal lives on camera for a sec, let's get straight into the F1 stuff, because I know you all have lots to say about that Mercedes W14. How did we get here, Baxley? Because it seems like they've built another SH1T box of a car, notwithstanding lessons that they could have learned in the off season and on the back of the massive amount of data that they should have gathered over the past 12 months. Baxley, enlighten me, sir. How are we here once again, Groundhog Day, as Mercedes F1 fans?
Yeah, from the sounds of things, they didn't listen to Lewis or George. But that's obviously referencing some comments that Lewis made about he basically turned around to the BBC after the race and said, I told them what that we needed and they didn't put it on the car. I mean, this is clearly a failure of concept from Mercedes. I think the proof was in the pudding, really, when you had a look at the other teams. All nine teams were kind of putting their direction towards the Red Bull Ferrari style design, and it was only Mercedes that were persisting with this kind of concept. Yeah, it was to be expected that they were going to be off the pace. They were very clear about that from the test. You know, George Russell basically saying, look, it's probably going to be 6 races before we get into it. But then Toto Wolff basically decided to do the most un-Mercedes thing possible and throw the baby out with the bathwater and just be like, concept is rubbish, we're starting again. James Allison has reportedly been brought back, though I think that was pre-Bahrain, so he's probably been on board for some time. But yeah, as a Mercedes fan, not a good time. You know, we've had another difficult start to the season, and even after one race, I think it's fairly safe to say that we ain't going to be winning any championships this year.
And how tragic is that, Shes? That already we're talking in these very definitive, almost resignation terms, and especially when you consider that Lewis Hamilton is coming towards the tail end of his career. Shes, how do you ingest the chaos that's going on at Mercedes?
Yeah, I mean, it's number one. I think the ghost of 2021 is not going away anytime soon. I think the attitude that we would have towards this as a challenge, as an engineering challenge, would be completely different if Lewis had his 8th title in the bag and we weren't having to go, oh, is he going to get it? Is he not going to get it? But it's now become a do or die situation, isn't it? That just at the time that we want Mercedes to be absolutely on it, so Lewis can really show what he's got. He doesn't have the tools to do it. And I don't just say that as a Lewis fan. I say that as an F1 fan that everyone wanted a rematch of that Titanic battle in 2021.
Mate.
And we're being denied that through a side of Mercedes's game that we thought they had licked, and they just they haven't. They've dropped the ball.
And the irony, Shez, isn't lost on me that since 2007, I've also wanted to see a rematch between Fernie and Lewis. And the time that Alonso finally has a set of wheels worthy of his talents that can take him to podiums, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, not quite, but Lewis Hamilton doesn't have them either. Shez, let me bounce this at you, mate, because I'm keen. What do you blame this on? Like, what's this wholly attributable to? Why do Mercedes find themselves in this dire state?
So I'm going to have to go back on my usual sort of logic to these things, because the way I normally see this is if you've got a concept and you don't understand why it's not working, you do need to understand why it's not working before you head off in another direction. But it feels to me like Mercedes have done everything they could to get this concept right, not necessarily understand whether it is the right concept. And it's and there's, I mean, we've talked about this, offline as well. And I guess one of the things that really concerns me is after the second Barcelona test last season, Mercedes were talking about a 1.5 second gain in performance that they'd seen on the simulator by bringing on these new side pods. Well, they seem to have got that gain, but they've got it a year too late. They've got it now. And they've now reached the edge of the potential of that car. It can't get any faster.
Unbelievable.
There was, again, this isn't my thoughts. These are thoughts from some pundits online. But what you have to worry about from this is one, that the correlation side of things between the simulation tools that Mercedes are using, be that CFD, wind tunnel, or the driver and loop, and the racetrack, and how and whether or not they are correctly evaluating the other possibilities that are out there. So why is it that they can say, well, we've looked at the Red Bull concept and we don't think it has the same potential as our concept, and yet we get to the end of the race in Bahrain and they've done a full 180 and said, actually, no, our concept doesn't work. So there's clearly a problem with the tools they're using, or if not with the tools they're using, how they're interpreting the data that they've got. And that's a really, really big worry.
Oh, mate, Baxley, talk to me. Chime in on this. How you agree or disagree with Shez?
No, I agree with Shez, and I think something else that we can look at is the movement of people amongst the teams. I mean, we all, as fans, focus on the drivers, but I think a lot of emphasis has now been placed on the movement of the engineers and the aerodynamicists. And I think Mercedes have lost a lot of people and haven't necessarily recruited in return. I can't remember the guy's name, but one of the key aerodynamicists went to Aston Martin. Look at them now. They're having a fantastic start to the season. And it's perhaps Mercedes have kind of cooled off on being the aggressor, because I remember they were snapping people up left, right, and centre previously, and kind of people were wanting to go and work there because they thought, we want to go work there at a team that not guaranteed but pretty certain to win world championships year after year after year. And perhaps some teams don't want their employees to go there because that's giving secrets to the big boys. But I think they're definitely not being as aggressive with their recruitment, or certainly from the outside looking in, from what we can see, they're not being as aggressive with it. But I also think there's been a huge bit of stubbornness as well. I think, as Shez very brilliantly put it, it's they've wanted to get the concept right and not understand if it's the right one. And it's taken them 23 races to get there. It's taken far too long. I think we're now looking at a situation where I think, there's obviously there's stories that apparently Mike Elliott's been given an ultimatum by the team to basically fix it, or essentially head out the door. Obviously James Allison is back, so that's not really a great vote of confidence for Mike Elliott. If the guy that designed some of the greatest F1 cars of all time has been brought back from his retirement paradise with Ineos America's Cup. So difficult time for Mercedes. And I think what we're looking at here is a potential sack-off of the 23 season to do what Aston Martin did last year, where they get the concept on the car, but then spend time developing it away from the track, make some steady gains, and then make a huge jump forward for 2024, which we don't want to see. We want to see Lewis at the front. We want to see George at the front, competing for wins. But I think we might get a couple of race wins this season, but I'm not sure we're definitely not fighting for a championship, and the wait for the 8th goes on.
Oh, mate, it's so depressing, Baxley. And to chime in on the root cause, I've been doing a bit of putting my aero cap on and trying to understand, because I keep being told by people infinitely more intelligent and wise around all things F1 that side pods are a bit of a misdirection, that put the side pods on and you can't integrate them into this design concept. But that's not the question that I'm asking them in good faith, right? the question that I keep posing is, why didn't Mercedes bake side pods into their W14 design philosophy, knowing all the while that what's mission critical in 2023 with a raised floor is controlling the front wake off the front tyres outboard. That's really, really important in an era where there are no barge boards to do that for you. Hence why in 2023 you see the likes of Red Bull, Aston Martin, as far as the width of their side pods, they've expanded them, not contracted. And yet and still we see Mercedes launch a W14 with slim pods, and then they're wondering why on a rear limited track like Bahrain they struggle with downforce at the rear of the car mid apex. I'm like, is there something that I'm not computing here? Is this not just common sense? Because if I can understand it, I'm not an aero guy by any stretch of the imagination. But if I can understand that at a very base level, why can't they, chaps? And therein lies my frustration. And even, letting James Allison go at a critical time in terms of the evolution of the F1 rules. Is this not just really shoddy decision making, like rule of first principle type stuff, Shez?
Yeah, but it's a two-way street there, isn't it? There was a time at Red Bull where Adrian Newey was stepping back from day-to-day running of the team.
But
did the same thing at McLaren, right?
But Shez, what's that about? So here's where I don't want to do this. I'm properly flogging a dead donkey with this. This is the thing that I love to talk about. This is the difference between Toto and Christian, right? And if you listen to Peter Windsor, Peter will tell Adrian likes to work the way Adrian likes to work, and Christian Horner will delegate that authority to him and give him the flexibility to work how he wants to work. That's ultimately why you couldn't get by or get on even with Ron back in the day at McLaren, because Ron's a micromanager at core, right? This is how we all work because this is how I like to work. Whereas Christian understands that Adrian is a key man, and Red Bull's success depends very much and is a function of Adrian being happy. Whereas Toto, on the other side of things, is on about letting James Vowles go so he can develop his career. Right, that's all nice if we're doing the kumbaya thing around the bonfire with marshmallows and all happy together as a community. But if you're looking to win championships, surely you need to do whatever it takes to keep those key men at the team and not at another team or at Ineos, or however you pronounce it, building ships or whatever.
Yeah, but then you have to kind of look at it the other side of it as well, right? That at Red Bull, Adrian Newey is head honcho. He does have absolute iron fist control of that technical team, whereas at Mercedes, James Allison was the head of the technical director there, but he still delegated a lot of that responsibility downwards. That's why you had people like Mike Elliott in places of seniority, and the problem with the way that all of F1 works right now is, number one, everyone's having to contract their teams. You can't hold on to everyone because the budget cap won't allow it. And second, when you're at a team like Mercedes, with James Vowles, what is the next step for him, right? If you're creating if you've got an organization where the absolute top posts are already filled by people that are very competent at their jobs, people aren't going to say, well, they aren't going to stay in that organization, because they're going to say, well, yes, there is a chance of me winning championships, but I can't progress in my career. That's something that I can sort of bond with, because my entire career is about how do I progress to the next level, and I feel that in an engineering department, that's what you're trying to do as well. But if that job's already taken by someone that isn't going anywhere, your Toto Wolffs, your James Allisons, even your Mike Elliott's, then you're going to say, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. And then you take all of the knowledge that you've got from your team and you strengthen somebody else. Ugh. But how can you tie someone into that organization unless you can promise them or give them some hope that they're going to be in a position of influence at some point in the foreseeable future?
Oh, mate, directly to that question, Baxter, aren't there ways? A long-term incentive plan, more money, more flexibility, time off, a cheeky away day or a holiday villa in Nice somewhere fancy. Surely there is a way, Baxter.
Honestly, I think it comes down to the wants of the individual person. I think we've got two perfect examples of it this year on the grid. You've got Dan Fallows, who moved from Red Bull to Aston Martin, and you've got James Vowles. Now, James Vowles had pretty much reached his ceiling at Mercedes, barring Toto Wolff getting his P45. So, and perhaps he was the next cab off the rank. That may still happen in the future. That's perhaps why he's gone to Williams. Whereas Dan Fallows had been Adrian Newey's number 2 for years,
15.
and had 15, my word, and had been given the opportunity to go to Aston Martin. Aston Martin have been the most aggressive hirers as they expand their new project, and look what's worked for them. He's taken what he's learnt from Adrian and put it onto the Aston Martin, and it's now the second fastest car on the grid, considering they finished 7th in the constructors last year.
But just to that point, right? It is the apprentice going to another team, right? So can I put this one to you? Do Aston Martin also have a talent ceiling? Like, is Dan Fallows always going to be one step behind what Adrian Newey can do? And therefore, are Aston also always going to be one step behind Red Bull? Open question.
I think now that he's got his own sort of team to mold, he can do his own thing. So he'll have his own room for creativity, and he's got the lessons he's learned from Adrian, and he's probably read Adrian's book cover to cover many, many times. But he will certainly have that opportunity to grow and do his own thing. I mean, there are certain concepts on the Aston Martin that you won't find anywhere near the Red Bull. I mean, those water slide things on the side of the car for the downwash, you don't see that on the Red Bull. The Red Bull's actually quite flat in comparison.
They haven't made the car faster than the Red Bull, though, right?
Well, no. He's coming from a lower base than what Red Bull had. Obviously, Red Bull got their cutout on the side. But yeah, it's different ideas, different philosophies. This is what I said in the last episode. I said, everyone's got their own ideas of the same regulations, and it's about which ideas can they put forward and allow their drivers to exploit that best on track. I think I've bungled that one, but
no, I hear you, mate. And to Aston Martin, in fact, lastly, before we get into Aston Martin, Nate Saunders, editor over at ESPN F1, has put out a very interesting thought experiment, a brilliant article where he's talking about overreaction, and he does the overs or under. Here's the premise. Lewis Hamilton, and we touched on this a couple of episodes back, Lewis Hamilton has won his last Grand Prix. Ergo, will never ever win another Grand Prix in F1 so long as he's there. Are you a buyer or a seller of that thesis, Shez?
As in, like, do I agree with it or not?
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely do not have a crystal ball, but I have persistently got more pessimistic as we've got further away from 2021. And my problem is as I look at this post Bahrain 2023, there are too many obstacles in his path right now. Man, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm worried. I am genuinely worried that yes, that there may not be another win. There'll be against the odds performances, there'll be podiums, there'll be all of that, but hitting the top step on merit, I don't know, man. I don't know. I actually genuinely don't know. Hit me with some optimism, someone, please.
Baxter, the floor is yours, sir.
I'll give you the optimism. You can take that opinion, screw it up in a bowl and burn it in the dumpster fire.
Let's go.
Honestly, if Mercedes give him a car that can win races, he will win races. We saw last year that he still had the pace to compete when that car was in good nick. I mean, I think personally, I think he would have won in Brazil had he not had the collision with Max. And that did damage his car, and it's why he wasn't able to close on George. I mean, don't get me wrong, George did a fantastic job in holding Lewis off in those closing laps, but I think if Lewis had had that car fully optimized to where he wanted it to be, he would have won that race. And I think, and he showed in his battles with Alonso, I'm sure we'll get into this in a bit more detail, but he showed that he's still got the instinct. It's when you lose the instinct, and you like, how many drivers would have just gone straight back up Alonso on turn 4? No one would have done that. Yeah, no one. Yeah, Verstappen would have already forced him off the road.
So I would live to fight another day is definitely true, right? But and none of what I say is because I think that Lewis doesn't have the ability to win another race. I'm worried that the team that he drives for don't have the nous to get themselves back into contention again. It's not about him.
Well, this is the key point, and I think we'll get onto this. But I mean, I think a lot is going to be made of what happens when this Allison upgrade arrives. I think I'm hearing various different tracks like Baku or Imola or whatever. And it depends the path they go down. If they do what they did last year, develop the car, win a race or two at the end of the season, and then everyone gets that sort of hopium where like, oh, we're going to challenge for the title next year. And then they start the season at the back, back to where they were like this year, then we'll think, okay, certainly may not win any more races, may not win championships, etc. But if they say, right, this is the only upgrade we're bringing and we're going to hit the ground running in 2024, then we might feel a bit more optimistic about it. But yeah, we don't want to turn into Red Bull, who always developed their car in the previous era, always developed their car really well towards the end of the year, and then were mystified that Mercedes were a second quicker than them. So
it's a good shout. Go on then, lads. Before we get to Aston Martin and then deep dive on Red Bull, let's talk to. I agree with you, Baxty, that Lewis's instincts haven't eroded just yet. But I try to break down with Mr. Philpott on Twitter the interaction between Alonso and Lewis into like turn 9. When he got the move ultimately done, I think it's turn 10, right? Turn 9, turn 10, whatever. Like you could see that Lewis, I'm not sure, right? And again, I keep having this compare and contrast. I'm not sure that 07 Lewis handles that the way that 2023 Lewis did, because here's what I think Lewis tried to do. I think Lewis depended on the overcrowd before flicking in left. And I think he in his mind didn't even bother to check his mirrors right, because he presumed that Alonso was sufficiently impacted, detrimented as far as his momentum because of the overcrowd, that there was no chance of him doing the dive bomb up the inside. Hence why, and this is the point I was trying to make to Bradley online, hence why, as Lewis has turned in, if he had any concept or any expectation that Alonso was going to be there, he wouldn't have done one of these with the steering right. As he's gone to turn in, you can see he's shocked that Alonso is either there at all or so far alongside him. I'm just thinking, there's a couple of times that Lewis has been caught short like that. Abu Dhabi, but again, you can argue Abu Dhabi was that was always going to happen because Max was on red labeled, fresh red labeled soft compound tyres. But I feel like I'm seeing things from Lewis that even 3 or 4 years ago we wouldn't see necessarily, in terms of the way that he defends, the aggressiveness with which he defends his position. Shez, tell me I'm a liar.
I think in the 2 or 3 years, those 3 examples, right? Because I think the examples that I can think of are, like you said, Abu Dhabi 2021, but there was pretty big extenuating circumstances for that. Austin last year, and then Bahrain this year, where you can possibly make an argument, but
Spa as well, although different type of incident, right?
Yeah, I mean,
uncharacteristic. Shez is the point.
But I think number one, if Lewis had not even had an inkling that Fernando was there, there would have been an accident because he would have turned in, right? But Lewis had probably the better line going into that corner into turn 10. Fernando was taking an unseemly tight line, right? And it's testament to how good the traction on that Aston is, how stable it is mid corner, that he was able to maintain that. Whereas Lewis, even though he was taking the better line, you saw as they came off the corner, he couldn't keep up down the back straight. And you kind of have to go, well, if Lewis has the better line, no, not even what's the point? Because I know you're going to come back to me on that one and say, well, 07 Lewis wouldn't have even thought about what's the point. He would have just done it anyway. It's not just that. Lewis with the better line and the better approach to that corner still wasn't able to make gains on Fernando. I mean, that's got to say something about fact that. Yeah, go on.
But Shez, with the correction, you don't kind of. I hear where you're going with that, but it's not a fair test, right? By virtue.
Yeah, but the correction wasn't.
I think it was it wasn't a massive correction, but still, that's going to detriment the momentum and the speed that you ultimately take onto the straight, right?
But was that correction because of Fernando? Was it because, again, they've got that mid-corner instability that means that he's still not...
The timing of the correction was
maybe.
Right. I think it was Fernando.
Maybe it was. But I don't think that compromised him so much that he was that far behind going into the next corner. And that move was already done by that point anyway. Fernando was already ahead.
Maybe. It's so sad that these guys haven't got equal-ish machinery, being Lewis and Alonso. Finally, bloody however many years later, that's 15 years later, I've been looking to see these guys battle. And now we've got the opportunity on Alonso's side, was he's been going around in SH1T boxes all this time. And now Lewis has got one. Ridiculous. The irony's not lost on me. Talk to me about Fernando El Plan Alonso very quickly, Baxter, before we do a deep dive on Red Bull and their perceived dominance. What did you think of his race? Driver of the day? Are you happy to see Fernando El Plan Alonso back in a car that's commensurate with his perceived driving talents?
Yeah, I am. But at risk of sending some of our regulars into a fit of rage, I think it's great that Alonso's in half decent machinery again. I mean, I think the last time he had a good car was, I'm going to say 2010, because that 2012, even though he nearly won a title in it, was not a great car. The 2010 car was a lot better, and that's 13 years since he's had a good car, and obviously a couple of years out and stuff. So yeah, it's been long overdue for somebody of his talents. I do think it's criminal that somebody of that talent has not won a third world title. It's just crazy to think that you think of guys with three titles. You think of Senna, you think of Piquet, you think of guys of that ilk, and Alonso's up there, if not better, than some of them. Not Senna, but certainly a lot of those guys.
Shez's eyes. Shez is not.
Yeah, no, he's not better than Ayrton. Don't worry. But
that wasn't what I was thinking of.
But the move that the move that he put on Lewis goes to show, this is something I've heard you speak about before with his big brain. Lewis, he went down the normal place, turn 4. Lewis, he pulled a move on Fernando that Fernando wasn't expecting, and he acknowledged that after the race as well. He said, look, Lewis's talent was good enough that he could recover from that. So he thought, right, I'll try selling one onto turn 10, which can be used as an overtaking spot, but you kind of have to benefit from the driver making a mistake. Lewis got it absolutely spot on into that corner. So Alonso had to be perfect, and he was. I mean, I described it on Twitter recently as a masterpiece of a move, because it was. It was just a driver with galaxy brain-like thinking and just going, yeah, I'm going to go for it. Look at what happened a few laps later when he passed Sainz. Sainz tried to defend it, locked up, left himself compromised, and Alonso just went, see you later, I'm on the podium. Yeah. But I think it's great that Fernando's back. I think, is it going to be a title fight with Max? No, let's be honest here. But it's nice to see him competing. And I'm going to say it, I think he will win a race this season.
Of course he will, mate. Of course he will. He's Fernando El Plan Alonso. Give him a bone, and he's not going to let if he gets a sniff of one, he's not the type to let go. And if you do a deep dive on that move again, he's just been, I suppose now he's in a car capable of winning or getting him on the podium regularly at least. You're going to start to see his racing brain manifest more often, right? Even in the overtake on Lewis. I think for me, Baxter, the reason why it was a thing of beauty is that he was very quick to jump out of the loud pedal so that he wasn't detrimented by Lewis's overcrowd, and that ultimately enabled him to pull off the dive bomb. He's not bad.
Yes, yeah.
He's not bad, is he? He's not bad.
Mate,
As big of a
mate.
douchebag as he is, he's all right. Go on, Baxty.
Yeah, Fernando should be the hopium that all Lewis Hamilton fans have. That, Fernando at 41, 42 is still delivering great moves. And, we all perceive Lewis to be better in our little fan base. And, perhaps if Fernando can do it, why can't Lewis? So that's the little crumb of comfort we can take.
They finally find themselves in the same position, don't they? In that Lewis really wants his 8th, and Fernando really wants that 3rd. And for the first time, they've found themselves in the same position. But just before you move on, and I know you want to, but I think that Aston Martin and the characteristics that it has, especially in terms of the way it works its tires, I have never seen a car more suited to the way Fernando Alonso drives a car. In that, that whole negative degradation thing that we've been talking about in pre-season testing is exactly what he wants. He wants a car that he can, use his big brain to manage the tires in the first part of the stint, and then just absolutely turn it on in the second part of the season, in the second part of the stint. And that is where he always does the damage, because he's always a guy that you barely ever saw him, even in the time when he had cars that could do it, just sailing off into the distance and dominating a race. It was always an against the odds win. I think back to sort of the Nürburgring 2005, when he's chasing Kimi Raikkonen, and he chases him so hard it knocks the tires off of Kimi's wagon. It's unbelievable. That's the Fernando we're going to start to see, and I'm here for it. Definitely
I'm here for it as well, man. But just before we get onto Red Bull, Aston Martin, what a kick in the teeth, Baxty, for Mercedes fans around the world. They're a customer car, and here's what a customer car means. They basically have all of the same parts as the Mercedes, all of them by extension. The bloody rear suspension, gearbox. What else is there? There's the engine, of course.
Yeah.
There's another couple of bits and bobs that they share. And again, Lewis reflected on it over the radio, didn't he? He's like, they basically have the same car as us, so why aren't we as fast? Baxty, if you're Toto Wolff, how do you manage this message when you rock up to the next annual board meeting? How's he gonna? It's not a good look, is it, Baxty, at all?
Well, it's not, unless you're Toto, who's like massive shareholder in Aston Martin, and their stocks just went up massively after the race as well. So he's probably laughing all the way to the bank. But
wow.
No, joking aside, it's never good to lose to your customer team. I mean, I think I know certainly in the early 2010s, McLaren was the kind of famous one where they beat Mercedes, but that's because Mercedes were new and they were kind of learning things. It's the first time that I think Mercedes have been beaten on pace by a customer team since 2013.
Oof.
That's a long old time. And Ferrari haven't been beaten by a customer team in a long time. Neither have Red Bull, with the Hondas or the Red Bull powertrains or whatever we're calling it these days. And to lose to your customer team is a massive slap in the face.
It's a disrespect, Baxter. Using the same wind tunnel and everything. That is same wind tunnel. So how comes they have perfect correlation between what their data that they're seeing in there and in real life, but Mercedes, with all of their experience and all of their 8 trophies in the cabinet, they can't? Bonkers. Fat fellas, I'm just baffled. And I tell you what concerns me even more. Shez, you spoke, and lastly on this, Shez, you spoke about the correlation between the data that they're seeing and that there being a massive disconnect between that and the on-track stuff, especially around Red Bull as a opportunity cost, as a potential other scenario to pursue. But Nate and the guys at ESPN F1, they reckon that everything that they saw, that there is no data correlation disconnect, that everything that they saw in the wind tunnel, in the CFD models, is borne out on the track, except for a little bit of rear instability, But as far as pace, that they're seeing all the pace that they expected in 2023. So this is like bottom of the bucket expectations then from Mercedes. Did they not expect everybody else to kick on and gain as they have? Like, what are we bonkers, Shez? Bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, what I meant by that was not necessarily that they have an issue with their correlation themselves, but that their data regarding other concepts is flawed. They're not
right.
able to understand why other people are able to make their to make a different concept work better than that. This sort of
unbelievable
nirvana concept that they've got. And a lot of that does come down to what we talked about earlier, that they're not listening to their drivers. They're like, no drivers. This is what the sim tells us.
This is chaos, Shez. Absolute chaos.
It's a bit of an issue, isn't it?
And fundamentally, I was listening to somebody in the week. Fundamentally, if you're going to build a car that great drivers can exploit, the philosophy isn't to build a car with a peaky performance curve, right? The philosophy that you want to pursue and that Adrian knew will pursue every single day of the week is a stable, less peaky performance curve with more area and accessible performance underneath it, because that way you can give it to Max Verstappen and he can adapt to it and kind of mold it in his own image. Yeah, and still we've got Mercedes building this. Go on.
Except that actually Red Bull have built a very peaky car. It's just that the driver they have in it, maybe not this season quite as much, but that front end, if you listen to any of the other drivers that have had to drive that car, will tell you that it's a really extreme front end.
But that's not so. Okay, so the characteristics of the car are quite nuanced. I take that, Shez. But as far as the it's not a full. It doesn't need to be a full moon to extract the performance out the car, right? Night and day, quite literally, as far as its performance curve and how accessible that performance is versus Mercedes. Mercedes is much more of a diva that W14, I think. The way the ability to access that performance, because you can see Lewis and George just like what I don't know what the car's going to do from corner to corner, from apex.
They were saying
to
that
apex.
last season, but in certainly in testing and even in practice, Lewis was saying, "Well, I've got the setup. This is as good as this car can get. Yes, I've got a bit of rear end instability, but otherwise, this is about as good as this car's going to get." And yeah, that's the problem there, isn't it?
Not good enough, Shez. It's bonkers. Any which way you cut it, it's poor form. And then over the other side of the pits, you've got Red Bull, who are just absolutely flying. Chaps, let me put this past you first. I don't know if you've watched. I was in my chat with Peter Windsor, also on the channel. He said that one of the main reasons why Mercedes continued down this design concept road, it's because they won in Brazil. But Brazil, apparently, have you heard this theory, why they won in Brazil? I've never heard this before, that they only won in Brazil because Red Bull screwed up their setup.
Tire pressure, yeah.
Something. Screwed up their setup in bloody FP1 and because of the sprint race, they didn't have the opportunity to change it because of part ferme. So flatter to deceive is what the win in Brazil did. Fellas, with Red Bull, what's the true delta, and have we seen it yet? Because everything that I'm hearing is that these guys, so they tinkered with the floor heights between testing. So Max was super happy in testing, right? And then FP1, what's going on? My balance is gone, like fretting and doing all this madness. So they tinkered with the floor heights to err on the side of caution, didn't want to erode the skid block too much. Number one, turning down the engines like halfway into the race. Like, what are we over a second? Is it a second and a half to the rest of the field? Shez, tell me, what do you estimate the time diff between RB19 and the rest of it?
I mean, it looks huge. We haven't done the super time calculation yet. That's coming, and we'll hopefully try and do that as a prospective
in quali. Shez,
yeah,
I did it.
Tell me what it is.
So it was 0.3. Putting me on the spot. 0.39, I think, Talk
Over who?
amongst yourself. It was Charles, wasn't it?
Nova Charles.
Yeah, Charles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it-
0.39.
That's huge still. It is.
That's enormous.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge. Especially if you're
Big.
considering that they weren't at 10 tenths. They weren't at 10 tenths. That's the scary thing. So all right then. So Bahrain 0.326. Sorry, I lied. So Max was
So as in like
Max
Red
was
Bull was 100%.
yeah. Max
And
because Max put it on pole, didn't he? So Max was
Yeah.
89.708 seconds, and
Charles was 90 dead, wasn't he?
yeah, Charles was 90
130.000.
dead. You are right. Charles was 90 dead.
Yeah.
So 0.326 is the delta. And I did just that. I just wanted to compare because I'm scared that these guys are going to run away with it and seal the championship at like race 12 or whatever of 23. So I just compared to like previous dominant years, 2014 and 2016, because we raced around Bahrain then, and they were like, so 2014, the super time delta between first and second, not the other teammate, the next car, right?
Yeah.
2014 was 0.929.
But that's a percent, isn't it? It's 0.92%.
Yeah. So nearly 1%. 2016 was
That's massive.
0.58. Yeah. 2020, again, W11, that is 0.474. 2015, 0.4 recurring, the W06. So again, I suppose
These are average super times over the courses.
No, what I've done now is because I wanted to hone in on Bahrain in
Bahrain,
particular because it's anomalous. So I was going to do the races, but they don't really mean anything.
Yeah.
So maybe they're not as dominant as Mercedes have been in recent years, but still, I think that 0.3 is lowballing massively. I think they've got
maybe they're just not showing it.
Mate. Go on back, Steve.
I think that with qualifying, I think Red Bull always set their car up more for the race. We noticed that last year. Yeah, Ferrari do have a quick car over one lap. We know that. I mean, Charles was the pole king last year. So I think that you're always going to have a closer Saturday than you are on a Sunday. I think the pace that Red Bull showed on Sunday was frightening. And the fact that they were doing it with engines turned down and they were still quicker than everybody else. I mean, geez Louise, I mean, you've got to hope that...
no tired egg.
Next to no tired egg. Well, I mean, Max's hard tyres did look pretty ruined at the end of the race, but... and somebody did joke
Two stints on softs though, right?
Yeah, 2 stints on softs. I mean, the fact that they could do that just goes to show.
It's ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Yeah, I could understand why they did it with Checo because they needed him to get past Charles because he got jumped to the start, whereas Max could have just sat on the hards and just gone round and see you later.
Did you guys
notice? This is it, isn't it?
Sorry, Shay, just quickly. Did you guys notice the Checo sabotage? That they were the way that they were keen to make sure he didn't even sniff the same piece of track as Max. That he was due to go long, and then all of a sudden they just bring him in. They're not having that again this year, are they? Not even close, mate. Go on, sorry, Shez.
Oh no, I mean, all I was going to say is that just talks to how little effort Max is having to put into this.
Unbelievable, Shez, and his quali lap. Bloody
that was unreal, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh. Peter goes into some detail. It just looked easy. It just looked like really. The car is planted. Like it just looked very silky smooth. He wasn't missing no apex. And that's an interesting conversation point as well, lads. The difference between if you watch Alonso's onboard, the onboard of Alonso's quali lap back to back with Verstappen's, it tells you a lot about the difference between their Alonso's. I don't want to say he was on a ragged edge, but he kind of was, right, missing apexes, and like he was all over the shop, loads of corrections. Whereas when I watched Max's, the only correction that I saw was going into the last turn, and that wasn't a proper. It's only like half of, mate. Doesn't bode well, I'm telling you, especially around that real limited track. Does not bode well. Go on, Shez.
I think this is one of the issues with why people are so concerned about the season, because Mercedes had more dominance in 2014, 15, 16, but what we also had was a title fight, and it was a very compelling story between Hamilton and Rosberg. And then of course we had the 2 years with Ferrari, and it was only really 19 and 20 where Mercedes dominated before we had the Titanic 21. Whereas 2022, there was no real title fight. Ferrari very quickly capitulated, and Checo Perez is. I like Checo Perez. He's not going to beat Max Verstappen. No chance.
It's not that guy.
I mean, he might beat him this coming weekend in Saudi because it's a street track, and I think he would have won that race last year had he not been screwed over by a safety car. But he's not going to get anywhere near Max. For Red Bull, it's Max winning a third title, joining the pantheon of the legends like Schumacher and Fangio and Hamilton and Vettel. Getting that done. But we need the title fight, and entertainment's all well and good, but competition is entertainment. Absolutely, and that's how. And I fully agree with why people are worried for the season, because if it's just Max winning every single race, I mean, he's won 15 of the last 20.
Mate, what's the point over here? And
he's won 26 races since 2 years ago in Bahrain.
Point. What is the point?
That's an entire season's worth of races and change.
What's the point, Shez?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Even 1988 at least had a bit of a title fight to it, right? Even if one car was winning it. But just to flip that back at you, right? We're probably a little bit guilty of being quite nerdy about our F1-ness. So is there any part of you that is a little bit like, well, okay, fine, we want a championship, but actually, if Max absolutely steamrollers everybody, is there a little bit of us that goes, wow, that's pretty bloody impressive?
You got to respect it, Shez. Absolutely, you've got to respect it, but kind of I don't know, man. That's the purist in you, Shez. You sound just like Peter Windsor. He loves nothing more than a lights to flag. He loves the lights to flag. The best driver in the best car just runs away with it. That's his favourite type of race. I am, you guys have heard me say it a million times, I'm part-time purist, part-time DTS fan. And the DTS fan in me wants to see uncertainty. Shez, I don't want to do the 2000 to 2004 thing where I ended up pretty much every single race tuning in for the start, the first 5 to 10 minutes, sacking it off, going to play out with mates or whatever, and then coming back to watch the last half an hour, because I knew fundamentally Michael Schumacher 9 times out of 10 was going to nail the rest of the field. So I don't want that again, Shez. We need, and I suppose for the bigger picture, if we're talking about Liberty seeking to consolidate a new, younger demographic who are just laid eyes on the sport pretty much for the first time as at 2021 Abu Dhabi, as theirs makes no difference. If we're looking to consolidate that new fan base, we can't afford 2000 to 2004 again, right? Because they will do one of these with their remote control and just turn off the TV. There's TikTok, there is IG Reels, there are things that will provide them with that instant dopamine hit that F1 isn't doing anymore, notwithstanding the fact that it did so well in 2021, right, Shez?
Yeah, but I'm taking a step away from that for a second. I'm talking about like the hardcore, right? The absolute hardcore, and I'm going to argue a little bit that your channel caters to that hardcore, fan, right? He's not in it just for the quick endorphin release, right? And actually, one of the things, you start to watch back the old seasons, even seasons that you thought were quite good. Like I found watching 2003 even quite a difficult season to watch, because the way that the data is presented to you, and I know we complain about the way Liberty sort of express their data these days, but if you go back and watch those races, you had nothing. Like you didn't even have like the position of the cars.
That's so poor.
And like there was none of that. But at least now, in Bahrain, mate, from the first corner, I knew what was going to happen. But even then, there was a little bit of like, but someone could do something. oh,
was drama.
has Fernando got a little bit of and he's lap by lap you see the delta coming down and you go, oh, is he going to do something? Has he got enough time to catch Checo at the end? There's a bit of jeopardy in that, right?
Yeah.
And while all that's going on, you can still like flip on the onboard for Max and see what he's doing. You can look at his tire degradation throughout the course of the race. You can look at how far ahead of, how elastic is his gap between him and the next guy down, and just revel in it a little bit. Can I do that for 23 races? Maybe not.
I'm glad you
maybe
said
not.
it, Shez. I'm glad, because that's exactly where I was going with my rebuttal of that. I just think I think we can clutch onto like second class narratives. There will always be something going on. I mean, Hulkenberg is a good example of that, the resurgence of delivering on the promise that he failed to deliver on all those years back. But it's not
No, it's not the same. It's not the same. And I guess I'm looking for a silver lining.
It's no 2020, 2021, is it? It just isn't that. It's no 1994. It's just I need to see friction between the two protagonists fighting for first and second. And if it's not that, it's like watered down cordial. It's not the same. Diet Coke even. Baxty, take us out, mate. What are you hoping to see from this season then? What are the key plot lines that you're paying attention to, mate?
I've got a few actually. I think we're all going to be keeping an eye on Aston Martin and see how far they can take this, because obviously there's question marks over development and everything else. They seem pretty confident that they can maintain this performance. And when I predicted P5 for Alonso in the World Drivers' Championship, and I thought I was being bold with that, that now seems to be conservative, which is just crazy to think. Ferrari are always going to be a plot line because Charles Leclerc, engine failure, potentially looking at penalties already.
Unbelievable, mate.
It's just
unbelievable.
Matt Gallagher's face was the perfect summarization of Ferrari since 2022. Just that look of absolute horror.
Unbelievable.
McLaren as well. Definitely going to be looking at McLaren because, oh boy, that was a bad first race.
Mate.
I think the happiest person watching McLaren was Daniel Ricciardo as he was running down that corridor in the stupid assortment of shoes.
Did you guys hear about Lando punching the wall? Have you heard that story?
That got over-egged by... I think Buxton put it out there and then it kind of blew up and he kind of had to
walk it back. China's whispers. It wasn't that bad. Yeah. Shares. Go on, sorry, about safe. No,
I was just going to say that's what I'm watching. Those are my things. But without a title fight up front, we're kind of looking for these stories to
clutching at straws, eh?
Yeah,
just a tad. Not a good look. Shares your two plot lines that you're casting your beady eye over.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is still going to be can Mercedes can they go against our expectations and pull something out of the bag and in a budget limited era do something extraordinary. I want them to, I really want them to, but that's something I guess I'm either going to be exalted by because they do it, or I'm going to be frustrated by for the whole season because they just keep the same pace. And I guess if we're looking a bit further back down the field, I have to say I'm interested to see how far McLaren can improve. I mean, they say they've got some big updates in the pipeline. Whether or not they're game changer, because look, one of the big storylines that we were all interested in is how Piastri was going to measure up to Lando.
True.
And you know what? I really want to see that play out. What I don't want is to see Oscar spend his entire first season in F1 floundering at the back and being made to look rubbish because of something that isn't his fault. So I really, really want them to do a bit better. But I guess at some point, Cameron, maybe we can talk about why I don't think McLaren necessarily have the technical nous to do that.
Oof. Because they haven't hired the right people, Shez. We'll save
They,
it for
they
another
have
day.
not hired the right people.
Even close. Just weren't hiring key personnel. But again, same story with our mates over at Brackley. My key plot lines, I think Piastri already. I think a couple of things are going to come back to haunt Oscar, not least the whole contract shenanigans with Alpine, because it looks like Alpine, as far as absolute pace, have McLaren under manners. So that's going to come back to haunt him potentially, even though he wasn't going to drive there for the next 2 years. But whatever. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Secondly, with Oscar, remember when he held up the bloody board, best work experience ever? People are going to trot that one back out, aren't they, this year? Because sadly, for a noob, for a rookie, I think McLaren, the characteristics of that McLaren car, again, harping back on what we touched on earlier, if you can't predict what the car is going to do in critical parts of the track, being braking zones and the apex, like you could be Senna. It makes no bloody difference, right? In fact, the joke is that's what Senna struggled to cope with in 1994, right? He just couldn't get to grips with what he saw as an unpredictable dynamic of a car. So how's Oscar gonna do? Like, I don't know. He's
Senna still
brilliant.
stuck it on pole though, man.
Senna did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but then he was spinning down the road. Was it like bloody Nora? The first couple of races, he massively struggled. Bless him. But I think Oscar, it's unreasonable of us to expect from Oscar, because of his pedigree coming into Formula One, him to just jump into that car and see to Lando. I just don't think it's going to happen, chaps. And if he can even get close to Lando in that diva, mercurial McLaren, then I think he'll be doing well. And then lastly from me, guys, I think I'm curious to see what this development race is about, because we all know that Red Bull have a penalty as far as CFD and wind tunnel time. I want to see the delayed impact of this, because lots of aficionados are saying that in the latter stages of this season, obviously there'll be no impact as far as Red Bull's design and its efficacy just yet. But in the latter half of this season, if ever there was going to be an impact, we'd see there potentially. So I think it'd be interesting, say H2 of this season, whether Aston Martin, with their 100% of CFD and wind tunnel time, Mercedes wind tunnel time still, whether they can bridge some of that time gap to Red Bull.
Do we think the titles will be wrapped up by then, though?
100%, mate. Absolutely. Isn't the title wrapped up already? Like, I don't know. I don't know, mate. It's a hard life as an F1 fan at the moment. But here's how you never know. Stranger things have happened, eh? Stranger things have happened. Aston Martin 2023 Constructors Champions. Bloody Nora, that would be incredible. One thing I do know is that they're going to beat the works car for sure. And I did put that tweet out there before the season kicked off. Imagine, I said, in my infinite wisdom, Nostradamus Cameron over here, if Aston Martin beat Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship, to which I roundly got booed off the F1 Twitter stage. Look who's laughing now. And on that note, patting himself on his back, Cameron. Let's go. Someone has to. And on that note, I will draw this session to a close. For co-host Shez, for co-host Baxty, you guys have been legends. I've been Cameron F1 as always, and we will catch you same time, same place on the next episode. Between now and then, do me a favour. Look, but never stir. Peace.